Hi and welcome to this week's Mailbox, where we'll be going through Azerite traits, bad systems going live in the game, the nature of expansions, the RNG monster rises again, and Blizzard have finally come clean about Gnomes. So, first of all, I've actually managed to cool this room down a bit before I started this. It was not an easy thing. I've been getting up really early. I eventually had to get up at like 7 o'clock. I woke up at like 6 o'clock. Got up at 7 o'clock when it was hot then. And when it's hot at 7 o'clock in the morning, you know you're in for a bad time. But let's get on first of all. So, there were a lot of comments this week, some really good ones. I had to leave out some really interesting ones because there were a lot of great ones. So hopefully I've pared it down to the most interesting, or at least the ones we can discuss the most. First of all, in terms of last week's mailbox, where it was, the following people got this right. It was indeed Dolinar in Teldrassil, as Harley AMV said there, hashtag RIP. I did feel I had to do something on Teldrassil before the end, before we can no longer do that, or at least it's not as easy to do that. Obviously, you know, I often forget, but, you know, it will still be there in game. For lower levels, it only above a certain level it goes away, and even then I think you'll be able to phase it with a bronze dragon, I guess. So this week's is here. So again, what we need is the specific location of this mailbox and which zone it's in. In fact, someone on the Dolinar one, so I know someone in the comments didn't believe it was Dolinar because there was someone who said it wasn't. They said no, because you can't see such and such. Or I can be quite cunning with my angles. I do try and keep out any NPCs that are of any significance. Obviously, the gnome in the background there is of zero significance, so you know that one's fine. Just a quick reminder about the competition for the store mount there. So far there have been 2 clues gone in various videos. You'll have to check out the mailbox from 2 weeks ago if you want the details on that one. I'm not going to go over that again. But the 2 clues have gone, which means there are 2 more to come. With the 3rd clue, you'll probably be able to have a decent stab at it, and that's coming out over the next week. And then in the 4th week, you know, just before the pre-patch goes live, the 4th clue will come out. That should make it relatively easy. So keep an eye out on that. So, our first one on Azerite traits. We've been talking about this recently. So, what someone has said is if they are looking at these as tier sets, they might not plan to have unique traits in the first raid since there was no tier set until the 2nd raid. I was noting, specifically for my spec, Rep Paladins, that the traits that are currently listed, even in the beta, as being on the Azerite gear that you get from Uldir, the first raid, are the same sort of traits you can get from gear that you get from dungeons and stuff like that. So, they're not really unique. And someone said, I hadn't really thought of this. A couple of people made this point. It's quite a good point. So yeah, if we're thinking in terms of old tier armor, which won't exist for, and I keep calling it old tier armor, it's still current for a few more weeks. But it won't be in BFA. There's no more tier gear anymore. It is a good point. The first raid, the mini raid, like it was Emerald Nightmare. This expansion, last expansion, it was Highmaul. Didn't award tier gear. Maybe they're following the same pattern there. If we do liken it to tier armor, that in the 2nd raid, the larger raid that involves Ashara, that maybe they'll have unique raid traits there. The thing is, I've been racking my brains on this, and I'm thinking, see, I was under the impression that the raid traits were going to be unique. You know, in other words, the traits you get on raid gear, you can only get from raid gear. There are a few funny traits. You know, for example, there are some traits that are going to work differently in Uldir, for example. I can't remember what they call those sort of traits now. There's some weird ones that are targeted for certain areas. But I'm talking about properly unique ones, as in the gear you get from raids, you won't get those traits from, say, dungeons. And I was hoping that dungeon stuff would also be unique to itself. You know, and because the way I was thinking in my head is, well, you know, the raid traits could be stuff that's more suitable for raid bosses. The dungeon traits could be stuff that allows you to either build up a set for being good against bosses, for when it's tyrannical, or when that's the nature of the dungeon, that's going to be the thing that stops you. or, you know, better on trash, for when that's the thing that's going to cause you difficulty. That seems to be a loaded topic at the moment. And the stuff you get from out in the world, maybe that's more suitable for when you're doing solo world content. So I was expecting very different traits amongst them all, which doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. But yeah, you know, it's perfectly possible that that will happen as we get into the main raid of the first tier, because we can still call them tiers just because we don't get tier gear. You know, I think the gear was named tier rather than the raids first, if you see what I mean. I think we call it tier gear because it's the gear associated with that tier. So I think we're still going to get to call the raids tier, and all gear will be the same tier going on. As whatever raid. I don't even know what the raid's called. It's not even been open for testing. Does anyone even know what the raid is called that's going to have a Shara in it? I suppose they probably have released that information. Maybe it was at BlizzCon. But we haven't seen anything of it on the beta, which is very unusual because at the same stage in Legion beta, we were testing Nighthold bosses. So they're obviously doing a different development cycle this time around. All very strange. On to the next question. That's about Azerite traits. My mouse has been a bit funny. Sorry about this. It says, if the Azerite traits are weak, why even bother getting them? We'll take that first one first of all. So what I was saying is, I don't know about weak as in too weak to take. Obviously, they're going to be strong enough to take. And we've been looking at some of the sims of them at the moment. All I know is that the Blizzard team... Ian Hazakostas did say, and he said it very publicly, that they expected it to be roughly the same power as a 2-set bonus, that level of power. Not each individual one. I think they mean like the three together, the three pieces together, in terms of your throughput ones. Because the way it's organised, for those who aren't aware... You've got like 3 rings. So in the first ring, which you need the lowest level of your artifact to unlock, those are like throughput ones. Those are the sort of ones that are going to improve your DPS or your healing, something like that. Then your second tier is more of a sort of defensive type thing. So it might actually give you a heal under certain circumstances, or an absorb shield, or a movement speed boost, which might be passive, or it might be something that procs. And then the third one is just a straight up item level increase along the same lines as the first row in the Netherlight Crucible for the few weeks that remains in action. So it's a bit like a reverse of the Netherlight Crucible, really. It's like the pyramid is upside down. You get, you know, well, you don't really get more options on the first ring. In theory, there's 4 there, but you've only got... I suppose you do, because you can change spec and get access to that. So there are really 4 you can choose from in the first one, 2 on the second, 1 on the last one. Not really a choice on the last one. So yeah, so just to be clear, it's not that they're going to be too weak to take, but Blizzard have changed their mind and they want them a bit weaker than they had originally envisaged. That doesn't mean to say they're necessarily going to be really weak. At the moment, some of them are simming really weak, but tuning has only just started. So they're not where they're supposed to be. Now, where they actually envisage them to be, I don't really know. I mean, they just want to be scaled back from the equivalent of a 2-set bonus. So I guess a few % on your throughput. But some of them, as I say, at the moment are looking like about 10%. And some of them are looking like a couple of %. And I don't know really which one it's supposed to be. But the point I was trying to make is, if Blizzard are wanting to scale back that power... with the Mythic Plus dungeons, one argument that people are using, and it's really a false argument, is, oh, that means I have to choose between using powerful offensive or throughput, shall we say, because healers, same sort of thing. But let's say it's DPS, powerful offensive traits, or I have to choose defensive traits, which is not true because they're on different rows. But let's, I'll concede the point that, let's say you've got 2 helms. One of those helms has your BIS offensive trait, and the other one has your BIS defensive trait. So you've got to choose between those 2 pieces. But people are arguing as if your BIS offensive trait is going to be absolutely amazing. You're going to be raining death upon your enemies. And on the one that's got your BIS defensive trait, which will have an offensive trait you will have chosen, that will somehow be weak as piss. When that's not necessarily the case at all, especially when you look at the actual options. It's not like you've got access to all of the possible combinations anyway. They're set, and you can look at them in the Dungeon Journal and on the beta. I know not everyone has access to beta, but you can check Wowhead as well. So when you actually look at those options, you think to yourself, well, okay, let's say I went from this piece to this piece. Well, that still represents, you know, there's not going to be much difference in the offensive power. I'm not sacrificing. If I choose to go with the BIS defensive one, I'm not sacrificing much throughput. Because actually, there is much more variance in the defensive. Some of the defensive ones are rubbish, absolutely appalling, and some of them are decent. So you can actually prioritize the defensive one, and you're not losing much, if anything, on the offensive one is my point. And then the next point, now this is really interesting, and I'm not sure about this. It says, I thought the Azerite system was meant to replace legendaries, artifacts, set bonuses. How can it do that if it's weak? I don't think it was. I'm not going to say it definitely wasn't. I just don't think it was. I think it was there primarily to replace artifact traits. Now, I want to cast people's mind back to a couple of things. First of all, at BlizzCon, right? Technically, and it wasn't me doing anything clever, by the way. It was one of my viewers who pointed me to it. But I was actually the first person to announce, unfortunately not to the world because no one watches my video. Well, you do watch my videos, but many people don't. To announce that there would be no tier sets in BFA. Because this had missed people, this had bypassed people. It was in a very obscure interview that someone drew my attention to, where at BlizzCon it was actually suggested that there would be no more tier sets in BFA. And everyone had missed it, apart from the person who put that information my way. So, but people knew about artifact traits. So there was that period of time where people knew that artifact traits would be a thing, but also thought that tier armor would be a thing. Even though, obviously, they were thinking, but how is it going to fit together? Because that's like 9 pieces blocked out, isn't it? We've only got 8 pieces of armor, technically. But people did. There was a time where people saw them as coexisting. So do we really say that they're there to replace set bonuses? I suppose it doesn't matter what we think, it's what Blizzard think. But we were at that time thinking they're replacing the artifact traits, which is still what I think. Now, when it comes to legendaries, I don't think they were there to replace legendaries. I think the Legion legendary system isn't being continued to BFA purely because it was unpopular. I know not everyone hated it, but it was very unpopular. When you saw things being said on forums about it and lots of people like having their say, the vast majority of that say was negative about legendaries. Now, not everyone hated everything about the legendary system. Some people hated one aspect of it, some hated another. But a lot of people were very negative about the system of legendaries. Not necessarily that legendaries existed. So I think that's the reason it's gone. I think had it not been unpopular, we'd still have the same system in BFA. I can't know that, but that's what I strongly suspect. So I think they're there to replace the artifact trait system. I think the fact that the tier armor set is being removed is purely because when you think about it, it doesn't really sit alongside the Azerite armor system, because the Azerite armor system, helm, shoulders, chest. So even given you wouldn't need 6 pieces to have a tier set bonus, you could put it alongside it, because you could have your 3 pieces of armor gear. Azerite armor gear is what I mean. You could still have another 5 pieces of tier gear. It would just be different pieces. So it'd be all the other pieces like legs, belt, gloves, wrists, cloak, and that would be fine. But then you'd be thinking to yourself, so now you have, assuming you raid, you have no use for any non-tier pieces, because there's nowhere to put them anymore. So it didn't really sit alongside it. So as soon as they decided to do Azerite armor gear, obviously you were going to be removing tier set bonuses. And that suited them as well. So I think that's the reason tier set bonuses went. I don't think the Azerite system is a replacement for that. And I think the legendaries went because it was unpopular. And also, it's not just that it was unpopular, because sometimes things are unpopular, which I'll be coming on to with a later comment, and the Blizzard persist with it anyway. But I can imagine that there's a lot of people in the development team were also not keen on continuing the legendary system. Must be a lot of work for them to think of all those, and you've got to give them decent bonuses, haven't you, these legendary items. It must be a lot of work to think up interesting stuff for it, and to know that half of it people are going to deride anyway, because of course you're not going to come up with them all so that they're all exciting and appealing. So I can well imagine there was pressure from the developers to drop it, and if you've also got pressure from the players to drop it, well, you just drop it, don't you? So that's my thoughts on that one, and hopefully some clarification. Right then, so here's where I was talking about the fact that when you look at it, certainly for the last 2 or 3 expansions, where there's been a system that's clearly not going to work and people have said, look, this is not going to work for this reason, stuff like that, it's always gone live. And the problem is, of course, because people make a right arse on the forum. You get some people who will just straight up defend it. So straight away in Blizzard's mind, they're going, well, some people like it. So what I said was that the problem is that with the way people are with their reactionary statements, even when they're arguing for a particular thing, because they make an arse of the argument itself, they effectively, not quite nullify, but they certainly reduce the argument from people who have built up their argument properly. Someone's saying here, this isn't really true. People hate Titan Forging just as much as Legendaries, yet it's still around. I didn't say all of the systems that were unpopular were removed, because what I was saying is these systems are eventually removed, but they're removed later on. They're removed either when it all goes live and it's super obvious to everyone it's not working, and they go, oh shit, as if it's a surprise to them, when it wasn't a surprise to people who knew what they were talking about. Or like if it's really bad and they've got to remove it straight away, such as, say, Greater Blessing of Might for Paladins, they just straight up remove it. And or if they can change it, like they did with Priests Surrender to Madness, then they'll change it. And if it's something they feel that isn't game breaking, and they can just leave it till the next expansion, they do that as well. But then it is dropped in the next expansion. But there's 2 things about Titan Forging. As I said, I didn't say that every system is dropped. But the other thing is, the person here is focusing on the unpopularity of it. I didn't say unpopular systems. I said systems that don't work, specifically. And also I didn't say all sorts of systems. Titan Forging does work. As a system, it works perfectly. It's unpopular. It doesn't work well for players. That's not to say all players hate it. Some players like it. But it doesn't work well for players. But that's irrelevant. It works well for what Blizzard wanted it to do. So that's not a system that's failed. Titan Forging was there to get people to keep doing content long after its normal shelf life. And people do that. So it worked. So they're keeping it. That's all there is to it, I'm afraid. But yeah, you can have a look back. You try and find an example during an alpha-beta cycle of a system that players have said is not going to work, like players know what I'm talking about, not going to work, and Blizzard have dropped it. Never happens. And yet, every expansion, like now, for example, Ian Hazakostas has been quite open about talking about some of the things that haven't worked in Legion. And those are the things that people were pointing out long before it went live. But at the time, they defended it to the hilt. But at the end of it, when it doesn't matter, because they're going to change the drop, because they knew at the time it wasn't going to work, but they obviously, to begin with, they were obviously too stubborn, and then they ran it, and then maybe when they started to realise they just didn't have enough time, so they stuck with it, stuck to their guns, and then it became obvious, so then they just drop it later to save face, because the more things you have to drop during the expansion, the more you're showing yourself up that you were in the wrong in the first place. Let it quietly die at the end of the expansion, and then freely admit, oh yeah, we got that wrong. But, you know, for the next expansion, as if they're going to get everything right then. And it's the same hideous cycle, time after time after time. And it does my head in. It really does my head in. And to the next one. So again, onto the Mythic Dungeons one. So, someone here, this is part of a comment thread, because some of them are very long. But hopefully this is the relevant part. It says, let's say you want to clear a high tyrannical key with one boss that has a very cruel mechanic, such as Lady Hatecall's Focus Lightning. Herger's Arcane Lightning and so on. Herger's Arcane Lightning is very scary. Some classes will be stuck with the only possibility of survival in wearing a full avoidance set, which will hinder your output performance over the whole dungeon. Meanwhile, classes with great defensives like Rogues and Druid will be able to take a more throughput set of gear, perhaps with avoidance. Again, this argument that you're going to choose between taking full-on defensive gear, because at this point some people are arguing beyond the Azerite gear. The people are only arguing... just to be super clear, we're talking about the fact you can't change gear during Mythic Plus dungeons in BFA. So some people were just arguing about the Azerite traits, which was an absolute nonsense from the start, because I've already explained that in this video and other videos as well. Blurry again, I keep going blurry. That it's all a load of nonsense. But people are onto stronger arguments when they're talking about other pieces of gear, including trinkets. However, it's still wrong. I'll explain why. Really quickly, it's dead easy. It's a problem with class design. If you're saying that a particular class has nothing to deal with a particular mechanic, but another class in the same item level and Azerite's power and doing the same role, so one can, they're both basically the same. They're playing different classes, but they're doing the same role. They've got the same quality of gear. They've got the same artifact power level, and one can deal with it. And it's essential that everyone deals with it. I'm not talking about a situation where one person has to deal with this mechanic and you can decide who that person is. I'm talking about a situation where everyone has to deal with it. And one class can and one class can't. That is a problem with class design. That is not a problem with not being able to change the gear. Now, bear in mind, I'm not arguing strongly that this is a good thing that Blizzard have done, by the way. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think any change without a good reason is a good thing. What I'm saying is that it doesn't disadvantage anyone. It inconveniences everyone. Like someone has, for example, come up with another argument. I've replied back to them, hopefully getting a reply back from them. I haven't seen it yet. And they've said, oh, such and such is going to be really bad. And I've had to ask them, for who? Because if the answer is, oh, only for this class is it going to be really bad, okay, maybe you've got an argument. But that is still a class design thing. Well, that class should have some more work done on it. But if the answer is everyone, this affects everyone, then it doesn't. Because if it affects everyone, then everyone's in the same boat. It doesn't disadvantage anyone. So there you go. It says, so they, I mean, that's the thing. What people are pointing out here is not a problem with the issue about changing gear. Because if you are able to change gear, okay, you're able to get through the trash and stuff like that, and you come into this boss, you're still having to use that heavy defensive gear on that boss. That's still slowing you down. When you're pushing that high key and every second is precious, you've still gimped your throughput, even if you could change gear. The problem is not that you can't change gear. The problem is that the class design has failed to take into account the tools that are essential that everyone has. And that's been my argument on a number of videos recently. So onto the, I like this one, onto the nature of an expansion. So I was talking about the fact I don't like the fact that Blizzard with expansions feel the need to, change classes every time, because the basic game of World of Warcraft doesn't change. So what classes need to do doesn't change either. So why don't they just fix what's broken and leave what works? So anyway, someone said, if an expansion didn't involve change, what would it be? A patch. To which I would say, no. What you get with an expansion is content. And that, and that's not just a philosophical idea. That's how it is from MMOs. MMOs that I have played, new expansion comes out, what do you get? You get new content. And that's enough. You get new content. That's what you get. There's usually another theme to it as well, but what you're getting is new content. All right? Which doesn't all come out at once. The patches are used to roll out the story over the period of 1 year, 2 years. But what you don't get is massive changes to classes that already work. What you don't always get is an increase in the levels available, because that's a pain in the ass as well. You get new content, which means you get new quests, you get new zones, okay? You get a new narrative, a completely new narrative, so it's a completely different story now. You've finished that previous story with each patch being a new chapter in it. You get new weapons, new equipment, things like that. You might get a new feature as well that they've thought of, but you don't change what was already working. You just build on it, if anything, building on what came before. And it says, and to suggest that a change should only be beneficial to players is a bit of a generalised statement that is impossible to define. I really don't see how it is. It is a general statement, of course it is, because I want it to be beneficial to all players. Can't get much more general than that. Impossible to define. No, it's not impossible to define. You know, what people liked about a current system should remain. Easy to define. It says, how do you provide challenge, evolution, and excitement to a game if it is simply content that is changing? Well, here is the thing. The challenging content in this game, the premier content in this game, for PvE at least, but it's mostly a PvE game, is raiding. Raiding hasn't changed. Well, I mean, you know, some aspects of the way you get into a raid has obviously changed as time has gone on. But the actual base idea of raiding hasn't really changed. Okay? The mechanics are still there. You know, we almost never see a new mechanic. You know, we had on Mythic Kil'jaeden in general, you had the fog thing with the Illidan phase. That was a new mechanic. Can't really think of any other new mechanics in Legion. I'm not saying there weren't any. Maybe I can think of one. I suppose there was Star Augur, maybe, with the constellations bumping into each other. Was that a bit new? I've got an inkling it wasn't that new, but I can't think of a specific example of where. But there are mechanics before where two people get something, you have to move into each other. So was it really that new? I don't think it was that new. And I've also, you know, we have fights where you get two people that mustn't go into each other. So again, the mechanics don't really change. The fight, sometimes when a fight looks quite new, it's because they just put different mechanics in a weird combination. And the tougher fights tend to be ones where you've got multiple mechanics potentially that need dealing with in very different ways happening at once. So you can get someone, it's like, oh, you get this mechanic, you've got to move out. Oh, but if you get this mechanic, you've got to move in. And then you give them at the same time, and it's like, you know, you got that on Argus, for example. So that's usually what they do to make a fight challenging, more difficult. You give apparently contradictory mechanics at once. And that's how you do it. Because raiding has maintained its challenge. I mean, you know, Method have been talking about what has made some of the fights that we've had this expansion more challenging than many of the other fights in the past. So Blizzard have had no problem maintaining the challenge there. Obviously, with Mythic Kil'jaeden, one of the ways they maintained that challenge was making it impossible. Okay, fine. But the mechanics have been the same, and that's my point about why classes don't need to be redesigned each expansion, because what the classes have to do doesn't change. Hasn't changed since vanilla, really. A lot of the mechanics we look at now, people talk about raid bosses being more sophisticated. That's only because they have more mechanics in them, but the actual mechanics we have in them, we've had in vanilla. We had back then. You know, each expansion maybe there's one or two genuinely new mechanics come in. But the rest of it's just built on what's gone before. It says you continue to do the same thing with the same spec over and over, just in a different zone. Not fun. Well, you do that. That's what you actually do. That happens now. You know, if I'm doing world content and I come against an elite mob, the way I will approach that elite mob now is no different to the way I would have approached it in vanilla. I've got different spells now. I've got different abilities. But the basics of how I deal with it are exactly the same. You know, and can't really explain it any simpler than that. Anyway. And again, the last comment I should really point out as well, to think that you play a class knowing that it will never evolve from its current state would lead to a stale game. Again, I completely disagree. We only have to look at sports for this. Like World Cup at the moment, football. Football, in essence, every now and then they tweak rules, mostly to try and stop people just being unsporting. But the basic way football is played hasn't changed in over 100 years. Same with any number of sports that we all enjoy. People still enjoy that. You know, I can play a sport. Oh, I'm too unfit and fat. But when I was sporty, I could play the same sports that my granddad played when he was a lad. Still enjoyed it. Why do people feel this need in computer games to have something hugely, massively different just for the sake of it? If something's enjoyable, it's still enjoyable a year later. It's a bit like when we come to Classic WoW. I didn't really want to go into Classic WoW territory here, but there are some people who are saying, it's quite right to say this, that some of the people who didn't play Classic WoW, when they try it, when it eventually comes out, are not going to like it. That's true. That's completely true. But also there are some people who just don't accept, they don't believe that people can actually enjoy Classic WoW. Yes, they can. But they enjoyed it then. There's no reason why they can't still enjoy it. Just like people enjoy football now, they enjoyed it 100 years ago. You watch a game from 100 years ago, it's not that different. You know, they wore longer shorts, then they got shorter. In the 80s, I think they were super short, and early 90s. Then they've got longer again. Not as long as in the days of Dixie Dean, but still. You know, same with baseball, I imagine. You're still belting a ball with a stick. You know, tennis. You know, they're much more athletic now. The women don't play in skirts that go down to their ankles. But in essence, the game is still the same. And the way people approach it is still the same. Anyway, there we go. All of these are just opinions, of course. Right, the RNG monster. This is... I can't believe Blizzard have done this. I cannot believe Blizzard have done this. So I'll read the comment first of all, then I'll add mine to it. I wonder if Dungeon Azerite gear was nerfed to allow for more powerful traits in raids. Of course, as I said earlier, at the moment, it's the same traits. As it is Mythic Plus awards infinite heroic gear and up to 3 pieces, which I'm going to come to, of Mythic gear per week for a single plus 10 or plus 15. Because it's going to start off as plus 10, of course, and then it's... usually the way it works, isn't it? The way it works in Legion, I imagine it's the same here, I'm pretty sure it is. New tier comes out, or the new patch, major content patch, and it's plus 10 is the hard one. And then you get to the halfway point, and then it's plus 15, and then the next major content patch comes out back to plus 10, and round like that. This leaves raids with no meaningful gear rewards for the many hours of progression required to kill bosses. If I remember correctly, the early bosses in Uldir do not even drop Azerite gear. You are incorrect on that one, they do. Which bosses drop which bits may change according to your armor type, but me as a plate wearer, the second boss drops a piece. So, you know, they do, so don't worry about that. So Mythic level Azerite pieces can only come from Mythic Plus. So that's not true, by the way. In the first weeks or months of the tier for your average progression guild. This doesn't seem very healthy for the raiding scene. Surely they have to something in store to incentivize raiding. So, apart from that bit that is wrong, but they acknowledged that it may be, the main point is still... So, you might be able to hear a yappy dog. Sorry, it's been going on all day. It stopped for a bit, and that's why I started recording, and it started up again. Why don't people get dogs? I keep hearing people with like my former ex's mother, for example, kept saying, "Oh, I don't like the little dogs. They just yap all the time, yap all the time." No, big dogs bark as well. When they're barking, they're alerting you to something they think you should know. All you have to do is go to the dog and say, "Yeah, thanks, I know, shut up." And they shut up. We had a dog when I was growing up, a little yap, what people would call a yapper dog. She didn't do that. When she heard something, she used to bark, and then you'd say, "Shut up," and she'd shut up, and that'd be it. All they need is attention. Never mind, never mind. Anyway. Completely lost the thread now. Yeah, so, RNG. So, I talked about this before. The problem is that Blizzard, either they're being deliberately obtuse or they really don't understand the difference between different types of RNG. So the way I try to explain it, obviously you have RNG in a game. When people are moaning about RNG, they're not moaning about the RNG that makes sense, like whether you get a drop from a boss or something like that. Because like with tier gear, for example, you know, some people would get all their tier pieces in the first week a raid comes out. They were lucky. Some people it would take about a month, much less lucky. But everyone would have it after a few weeks. It might not be at the level you want, you know, the item level, but you would have the set bonuses after a few weeks. That sort of RNG is fine because that's what I call normally distributed around the player. So every individual player knows that within a reasonable amount of time, they're going to get, for the effort they've put in, they're going to get what they want. Some will get it earlier, some will get it later, but it's a reasonable amount of time. Then there's the RNG that is normally distributed around the player base. So this is, for example, Amanful's Vision, the legendary that drops off Argus, or doesn't drop off Argus, as the case may be. Now that's something, if you look at the drops, they're normally distributed. But there's no individual player could even know, even though we knew that we'd have all the way, when Antorus came out, all the way to the end of the expansion, which we always knew was going to be at least summer 2018. We knew that most players were not going to get this ever, even raiding this place for over 6 months and killing Argus every week. So that's the less fun RNG. The same applies to Netherlight Crucible. Okay, you know, no one could think to themselves, after about a month, I will have my BIS traits, or even good traits on the Netherlight Crucible. That wasn't the case. And Blizzard don't get the difference between those two types of RNG. If it's normally distributed around the player, in other words, so there's a set amount of time in which you might be looking to get it right at the start of that window of reasonable length, or you might get it towards the end, be a bit unlucky, but you've still got it after that amount of time. People will accept that. There will still be people who moan about that. These are the same people who go into LFR and moan every time their coin doesn't give them loot. Okay, you will always get people like that. Most people are reasonable. And they're okay with that. What they're not okay with is where they can think to themselves, well, I can put in the same effort as everyone else, and this person gets Amanthals on the first week, and I don't get it ever. And that's the RNG they don't like. So what they're doing, if you didn't already know, by the way, is with Mythic Plus caches, so we get our cache like we do now, you complete it at a certain level, and you get a piece of gear, which at the moment, if you do a plus 15, is equivalent at least to the item level of some mythic gear from Antorus. All fine. Except in BFA, it's going to drop up to 3 pieces of gear. So you might get 1, you might get 2, you might get 3. Now there's 2 major problems with this. First of all, you create disappointment. Because from Blizzard's point of view, I'm sure they'll be butthurt over this, and they'll, you know, it'll be another thing for them to say, oh, the community's arseholes, that's why we shouldn't talk to them anymore. Because that's basically been their attitude since WOD. So the problem is this. If you only get 1 piece, you're super disappointed. Because other people in the guild will be going, oh, I got 2, or I got 3. Even if you get 2 pieces, you're still disappointed because you didn't get 3. It's just setting people up for disappointment, and Blizzard just don't get it. They don't get it. But that's just one of the problems. The other problem is you're increasing, if someone said it, there is no issue at all with having that mythic item level raid quality gear from the cache. And the other thing to note, again, if people didn't know, that's the only way you're getting Azerite gear from Mythic Plus dungeons. Azerite gear is not going to drop from Mythic Plus dungeon. It'll drop in Heroic and Normal from bosses, but it will not drop in the chest you get at the end of a dungeon. It will only drop from your Mythic Plus cache that you get once a week. And of course, I don't think it's guaranteed to drop. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it's guaranteed to drop 1 piece of Azerite gear, and then either 1 or 2 or none other pieces of gear. Who knows? But yeah, so your other problem is, so at the moment, you know, you can get a good piece of gear, and it might even Titanforge. You might even get a better piece of gear from Mythic Plus Raiding. That's from Mythic Plus Dungeoneering. Sorry, that's fine, and that's okay. The problem is going to be that you can get multiple pieces. Now, of course, 3 is supposed to be quite rare. Not many people are going to get 3, which again just adds to this normal distribution around the player base and not the player. 2 is supposed to be more common, but I don't know what the actual percentages are. And it may be that they're going to be tweaked still anyway. So it's, even if they do exist somewhere, it's not really worth talking about that, I don't think. So let's say it works out that on average, every 2 weeks, you'll get 3 pieces of gear. So it's a bit like, almost like alternating. 1 week you get 1 piece of gear, next week you get 2 pieces, and so on. I'm not saying it is going to alternate, but let's say on average, it's the equivalent of. And then maybe once every couple of months, you get 3. Let's say that's how it works out. It still means you're getting more of that mythic raiding quality gear from doing dungeons. And although pushing super high keys is super hard, just getting the plus 10 or the plus 15 that you need to get the maximum item level from your Mythic Plus cache for serious players is nowhere near as difficult as doing mythic raiding. And of course the main incentive to doing mythic raiding is not the gear. It is for some, I think, but it's not for everyone, because it's not worth it for the gear. Like Asmongold has said, that's why he's dropping back from mythic raiding, at least to begin with in BFA, because it's just not worth it. But you can see the situation, aren't you? If you're motivated by gear, and even if you're not motivated purely by gear, you can still look at the situation and go, do you know what? If I just did heroic each week, and I do some mythic and do mythic plus dungeons and do at least a +10 stroke a +15, depending on where you are in the patch, you know, my gear's going to go up as well as doing Mythic Raid. Because Mythic Raid, you're not even guaranteed one piece a week. Bear in mind, you're not guaranteed, even if once you're clearing the bosses, there's no guarantee of even one piece per week. Whereas Mythic plus Raiding, you are guaranteed that. It might not be the piece you want. It might be stuff that you vend or disenchant, but you are guaranteed a piece. So yeah, this could hit Raiding. I hope it doesn't, but it could. Right, on to the next one. I found I've waffled on enough on that one already. So the culprit to me in modern WoW is definitely the need for perceived numbers balance, but also that the very top end PvE, as a result, narrows down the eligible specs and builds to an incredible degree. In order to achieve this, the game just cannot have too many unique skills. A lesser culprit is that it has PvP combat where they seek to balance it as well, but this could be solved by a rule set split for the abilities. Now, it's the last point I really want to tackle. The first bit, there's all sorts of things we could go into, many of which I have anyway. But in terms of the PvP one, I mean, this is an issue. In Legion, of course, we had separate PvP talents. That was supposed to help. But we do sometimes still get a situation where certain things in PvE are too weak, not because it'd be really overpowered in PvE, but because it'd be overpowered in PvP. There is such a case for my spec, for example, Ret Paladins as a talent, Divine Judgment, that would just be, people have already, you know, explained to me how powerful that would be in PvP. Now, apparently it's going to get a super, because at the moment it's too weak in PvE. Apparently it is going to get a super buff, but they may just nerf it for PvP. You know, have it, it does this much damage for PvE, but only this much in PvP, and that would sort it out. And it's easy to do that now because of War Mode. Because with War Mode, all PvP is effectively instanced in the game from BFA or from the pre-patch. All of it, every single bit of it. Because if you, even when you're out in the world, which is ostensibly PvE, if you've chosen to have War Mode on, you've chosen to engage in PvP, of course. So there is no way of any PvP occurring without that conscious decision. So it's effectively instanced. Effectively. Even though you're not in an instance, you'll be in a zone. So it should be fairly easy to have those separate skill sets now. But there is another issue, which is highlighted by that, in that although PvP have their own talent system, they still also have the PvE talents. So PvE doesn't have it. So when you've got an ability that you think, okay, this is okay for PvE, but it'd be super powerful for PvP, there is no way of removing it from the PvP player other than to make it do different things in PvE and PvP, which is not satisfactory for a lot of players. I know there's a lot of players who don't like that, and I totally understand that point of view. I don't agree with it, but then, to be fair, I don't do PvP, so I'm not really someone who should have an opinion on that anyway. But I definitely appreciate that point of view. But the reason for it is unfortunately because although PvP abilities can be removed from PvE because you have your PvP talents, you can't do this. The reverse is not possible because you don't have a separate set of PvE talents that becomes unavailable during PvP. Even though they could do that, maybe they should do that. Maybe how it is in BFA, where on the right-hand side you've got your PvP talents, because it's going to be a bit different UI. Maybe they should have on the left-hand side the talents that are only there for PvE. Because, again, totally separate now. But then that would mean that you're out in the world with War Mode on, and you wouldn't have access to those talents. It'd be a bit weird. I don't know. But I think, you know, from my point of view, that's where the issue between PvP and PvE is. So the only solution they have is to have them do different things. But they always seem to balk from that. It's not that they've always, because there have been abilities and there are abilities now which are significantly nerfed in PvP compared to PvE. So they are willing to do it. They just really don't like doing it. I mean, it came to the thing with the GCD thing, of course, global cooldown. You know, if they were arguing, which they were, which a lot of us didn't believe, but they were arguing this point, that it was mostly for PvP reasons, well, they could have just put these abilities on the global cooldown for PvP and left them off for PvE. But a lot of people would find that jarring when they move between the two modes. And perhaps that's what Blizzard took. Right, on to data mining then. It says they're keeping things secret because of data miners, which is good. Actually, there's an awful lot of things. They were at one time. At one time, it is true to say, I was talking about this on stream, and I talked about this in an interview with Peculiar from Wowhead some time ago. And there was certainly a time when Blizzard really hated data mining. But now, actually, they don't. In fact, they use it. They've seen the marketing benefit of it. So they actually don't. In fact, they've put in, remember, there's quite a lot of things they put in for us to find from data mining to build up hype. So they use data miners now. They're very much of one, and there's a lot of communication goes between Blizzard and the data miners as well. You know, it's very pally now. Obviously, there are some things they don't want. They don't want the cinematics being shown. Cutscenes is okay, apparently, but cinematics is a no-go. But all you do then is you don't put it in the game files until it launches. But anyway, so it says we need to have a game that gives us something new as we play. Of course. And it says then, you people telling us what's going to happen, destroy the game. Nothing personal. Well, nothing personal taken. However, most players don't look up stuff on YouTube, you know. Blizzard estimate there's about 80% of players who don't look at anything about the game outside of the game. Which is why on Battle.net, they're now on Battle.net telling players about how War Mode's going to work. And there's a lot of people going, well, we've known about that for ages. But actually, most people haven't. For most players, this is like, ooh, what's this? They have no idea. The majority of players, indeed, it's like, oh, this is a new thing. Ooh, let's look at this. Because that's the only way that Blizzard have of communicating these new systems to most of their players. Because most of their players just play the game and then they go off and do other things with their life. They don't watch things on YouTube and they don't, you know, look up guides or look at Wowhead or look even at the official forums. So most people, it's kept from them anyway. And I think it's beholden to people that when they do look up things and videos on things, they're looking for information. And it's fairly obvious when you're looking up things which videos are likely to have information and which is just purely discussion. But then you also know that even discussion videos at a time such as this are going to be talking about what's about to happen in the game, because discussing upcoming content is usually, not always, but usually more exciting about discussing what's live, especially when what's live has been live for over half a year. So no, but Blizzard's attitude to data mine is not a negative one. It really isn't a negative one. I've got that from the horse's mouth. Okay, last couple. I'm going for a while, I think, here. So on to the class uniqueness. So uniqueness is a strange topic. On one hand, you're right, classes have never been unique, and in others they used to be. All DPS specs run on a builder-spender system. You generate a resource to spend that resource. Only a few specs move a little away from this, with majors using procs and a resource. What this triggered in me, actually, initially, because I never really thought about this before. Even that is not... You might think to yourself, well, that's just the way an RPG is. But actually it's not, because when I think about it now, Lord of the Rings Online, which I also play, there are some classes that have certain similarities in building a resource and then spending the resource. But there's actually plenty of classes, or there's a few classes, that don't do that at all. Not at all. There's a Warden, for example, which uses what's called Gambit. So they basically have three... It's almost like playing on Tekken on a console, where, you know, you've got various different abilities, but you only got a few buttons. And it's the combinations of pressing buttons that creates that ability. Wardens sort of work like that. They have three abilities, basically. Well, four, technically. But they have three types of ability. And by using those in certain combinations and then pressing their what's called Gambit ability, it's like they've done their combo, now it's time to unleash it. That's how they generate their thing. So, you know, that's quite interesting. So that's a totally different way of doing it. That's not building a resource and then spending it. That's using three buttons to generate a combo. And that combo could be anything from, I mean, it could be a one button. It's not really a combo and it's one button, but you can use one button. Up to, I think, 5 is the most. And various abilities It covers an awful lot. I think lots to remember as well. I really like that class, actually, I have to say, but I don't play it because unless you're going to play it a lot, you'll keep forgetting. People have tried to come up with helpful charts as well, but ultimately in the middle of a fight, you don't want to have to be looking up a chart. Oh, I want to do a spear stab. What's that? Oh, I'm dead. But that's very different. You know, so there are a few classes in Lord of the Rings Online that just don't have that system at all. So it's not essential. Says, I do miss the days of being a paladin or priest, not a ret paladin or shadow priest. I think they can still keep some... I know what they mean, though. Yeah, because at one time, before MOPS, certainly that's what you were. Although, to be fair, I think even in TBC and Wrath, you more strongly identified with a spec. In Vanilla, you didn't. In Vanilla, I was a paladin. You know, most of the time, I would heal, but sometimes I wouldn't because the healing wasn't needed, and I would DPS. And sometimes I would tank. I needed a lot of time to get aggro, but I would tank. Didn't have a taunt. So, yeah, you were a paladin, and that's what people advertise for. They wanted a paladin. And as a paladin, I know in that guild I was in for most of raiding in Vanilla, there were certain requirements. It was a requirement that you were able to heal. It was a requirement that you were able to DPS. And it was a requirement that you were able to tank. And it was a requirement that you were able to maintain 40 blessings on people every few minutes. But all the things that your class could do, you were required to do. Whereas now, of course, each individual role has become much more specialised. So the classes have become more complex than they were, much more specialised, and you know, you're allowed to just use that specialism. So yeah, every spec could have a short defensive, but whoever had the longest cooldown one is where the raids would be tuned to. I mean, that's just going into sort of stuff that I was saying there. But I just wanted to pick out on this one the fact that even something as straightforward as basic, which is common to everything in WoW, and in fact we don't just have it's not even as simple as generate a resource and spend the resource. We have a dual resource system. Everything has a dual resource system. Like feral druids, rogues, and windwalker monks, or monks in general, I should really just say, but certainly windwalker monks. They have energy and combo points. Don't matter what you call it, chi, whatever. I don't care. It's combo points. Ret Paladins is quite similar. We also have combo points, but our resource is not energy, it's time. You know, we have to wait for the builders to come off cooldown. Warriors have their fury. Guardian druids have their fury. Hunters have their focus. You know, but you know But for a lot of the classes, you have a dual resource system. Death Knights with their dual resource system have been runic power and runes, of course. And other ones, some do have just a single resource system, of course. But they all have this resource system, build it up and then spend it. But there are classes that exist in other MMOs that don't. Right, on to the last one. Oh, I like this one. Where was this? There we go. So someone's saying, I was a Thete White Knight. I don't really need White Knights. You should always disagree with me if I'm wrong, or you think I'm wrong. Sometimes I pretend to be wrong just to appear human. Until the traitor went Horde. Yes, I'm sorry I've gone Horde. But I did have to reply here, my sincere apologies. I'm trying to bring about the downfall of the Horde from the inside by persuading Sylvana to let the gnomes join them. And this may actually not be as difficult as I first thought, because someone pointed out to me Blizzard tweeted something this weekend, yesterday in fact. Aren't all gnomes evil? Official now. Officially, World of Warcraft are of the opinion, or they were certainly of the view, that gnomes are evil. They put the question in there as if to say, well, I suppose it may be... Because Blizzard always try that thing, oh, it depends on your point of view. Yes, if you are even more evil, then you're looking back along there and you might think something's good. But there's not many things more evil than gnomes. So yes, official confirmation that even World of Warcraft consider gnomes to be evil. And not just some gnomes, all gnomes. Aren't all gnomes evil? And no one really came up with any strong arguments against this statement, I have to say. So there you go. So that's this week's mailbox. Thanks very much for watching. It has now started to heat up with the old lights on, so I'll be glad to douse those out and then work on some editing. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with other people who might also be interested. The Azeroth review, just as a reminder, normally on Tuesday. It's going to be on Monday this week, so that's tomorrow, at the point at which I put this out. So tune in for that. That's going to be on YouTube. The reason being that England are playing on Tuesday, and I wish to watch it. So thanks for watching. If you made it this far, until next time, I'll see you later.